The storm hammered Epsilon 7 with the fury of a dying star, turning the sky into sheets of crackling energy that made Kai Reeves grateful for his underground workshop. The mining colony's surface installations groaned under the assault while he worked by lamplight, repairing a damaged atmospheric processor that kept the settlement's air breathable. 28 years old and scarred by battles he'd rather forget, Kai had chosen this remote posting specifically for its isolation. No commanding officers, no political maneuvering, no reminders of the war that had cost him his unit and nearly his sanity. Just honest work with machines that didn't judge him for being human in a galaxy that considered his species barely above primitive. The crash shook his workshop hard enough to knock tools from their pegs. Kai grabbed his emergency beacon and stepped into the howling wind, his envirosuit's systems struggling against the electromagnetic interference. The wreckage lay scattered across the eastern plateau, definitely not one of the colony's cargo haulers. The sleek organic curves and bioluminescent panels screamed high-end alien tech, probably worth more than the entire mining operation. He found her in the cockpit, unconscious but breathing. Even through the transparent aluminum of her pilot's helmet, Kai could see she was unlike any alien he'd encountered. Her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between silver and blue, and her features carried an aristocratic elegance that spoke of genetic enhancement and centuries of careful breeding. Her flight suit bore symbols he recognized from news feeds, Altarian nobility. What was someone like her doing alone in this sector? Kai's combat medic training kicked in as he checked her vitals. No major injuries, but she needed medical attention soon. The smart thing would be to call it in, let colony security handle a crashed alien dignitary. But something about the ship's blast patterns made him hesitate. These weren't engine failures, they were weapon strikes. She stirred as he carried her to his transport, violet eyes focusing on his face with surprising clarity. When she spoke, her voice carried the melodic quality of her species, but the words were perfect standard. You're human. It wasn't an accusation, just surprise. Guilty as charged. You're hurt. I'm taking you to the med center. Her grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. No, please, they'll find me there. Who's they? My own people. Pain flickered across her features, and not from physical injury. I discovered something. Something that could destroy the peace between our worlds. They've branded me a traitor. Kai studied her face, looking for deception. His war experience had taught him to read people quickly. It was the difference between life and death. What he saw was fear, yes, but also a desperate sincerity that made his chest tighten. Why trust me? I'm just a human. A bitter smile touched her lips. Perhaps that's exactly why. I am Vera Thane of the 5th House of Altair. And you are? Kai Reeves, ex-Terran Defense Corps. A soldier. She nodded as if this explained everything. I've studied your people's military history. Humans fight for causes, not just orders. Will you help me? Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. Getting involved with alien politics was a fast track to an early grave, especially for a human. But something in her eyes, a desperate hope mixed with resignation, reminded him why he'd joined the Corps in the first place. My workshop's shielded and off the main grid. You can recover there while we figure out what comes next. As they drove through the storm, Vera's hand found his on the control stick. The gesture was clearly intimate in her culture, judging by the way she blushed. For the first time in years, Kai felt something other than numbness. He had no idea he'd just made the decision that would change the galaxy. 3 days into Vera's recovery, Kai learned that helping alien nobility came with deadly complications. She sat at his workbench, her opalescent skin now showing its natural luminescence as her injuries healed, explaining a conspiracy that made his blood run cold. The Altarian High Council has been secretly selling advanced weaponry to the Kethvar rebels, she said, her violet eyes reflecting the workshop's dim lighting. Not just small arms, quantum disruptors, planet killers. Technology that could tip the balance of power across 3 sectors. Kai set down his plasma welder, the implications hitting him. The peace accords would crumble overnight if this became public. But that's exactly what certain council members want. War is profitable, and they've grown tired of diplomacy. Vera's voice carried bitter disappointment. I was investigating discrepancies in our weapons manifest when I discovered the communications. My own cousin, Lord Commander Thex, is leading the operation. So you ran. I tried to expose them first. That's when the assassination attempts began. She touched a barely healed wound on her neck. Thex's personal guard cornered me at the spaceport. I barely escaped in a stolen ship. Before Kai could respond, his proximity alarm screamed. 3 sleek Altarian interceptors dropped from the storm clouds, their bioluminescent hulls cutting through the atmospheric interference like knives. Move! Kai grabbed his rifle and emergency pack, while Vera sealed herself into her recovered flight suit. They had perhaps minutes before the hunters reached the workshop. The first plasma bolt punched through his reinforced door as they escaped through the rear exit. Kai's military training took over. Assess, adapt, survive. The mining colony's tunnel system offered their best chance, a labyrinthine network that stretched for kilometers underground. Stay close, he whispered, guiding Vera into the maintenance shaft that connected to the main tunnel system. Behind them, voices called out in the melodic Altarian language. Even without translation, the tone was unmistakably hostile. They moved. Through the darkness, Vera's natural luminescence providing just enough light to navigate. Her grace was remarkable. Despite never having been in such crude conditions, she moved silently beside him. When they paused at a junction, she pressed close to his back, her breath warm against his neck. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've brought death to your peaceful life. Peace is overrated, Kai replied, surprised by how much he meant it. For the first time since the war, he felt truly alive. A plasma blast lit up the tunnel behind them. The hunters had found their trail. Kai led them deeper, through abandoned mining shafts and forgotten storage chambers. His knowledge of the colony's layout was their only advantage, but it wouldn't last forever. The Altarians had superior technology and numbers. In a cavern filled with old excavation equipment, they finally stopped to rest. Vera's breathing was labored, her earlier injuries taking their toll. Without thinking, Kai offered her his water ration. You need it more than I do, he said when she protested. As she drank, their eyes met in the dim light. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of their impossible situation and the growing connection neither could deny. Your people, consider mine primitive, Kai said quietly. Why trust me over your own kind? Vera's hand found his cheek, her touch electric. Because your kind fights for what's right, not what's profitable. I've studied human history. Your species will die for strangers if the cause is just. Mine, she sighed. Mine will sacrifice anyone for advancement. The sound of distant voices reminded them that philosophical discussions were a luxury they couldn't afford. Kai checked his rifle's charge and considered their options. The main evacuation tunnel led to the spaceport, but it would be heavily watched. The old geothermal plant offered better cover, and he knew of a hidden transport there. Can you make it another kilometer? He asked. Instead of answering, Vera kissed him. It was brief, desperate, and tasted of alien spices and human hope. When they broke apart, her eyes held a determination that matched his own. Led the way, my guardian. As they moved deeper into the colony's forgotten depths, neither noticed the small tracking device that had attached itself to Vera's boot during their flight. The hunt was far from over. The stolen transport ship Wanderer was a rust bucket freighter that had seen better decades, but it had 2 things going for it: a functioning hyperdrive and complete absence from any official registry. Kai had purchased it from a smuggler 3 years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. Now, 48 hours into their journey to the neutral zone, he was grateful for his paranoia. Your ship is charming, Vera said diplomatically, examining the patched hull plating that served as the common area's wall. Kai laughed, the first genuine laughter he'd felt in years. It's not much, but it keeps the vacuum out. Mostly, they were heading for Sanctuary Station, a free port where questions weren't asked and credits talked louder than politics. It would take 3 days to reach it, 3 days alone in hyperspace with the most beautiful and dangerous woman in the galaxy. Vera had changed from her flight suit into clothes from his emergency supplies, a simple jumpsuit that somehow looked elegant on her tall frame. Without the formal trappings of nobility, she seemed more human, more approachable. When she smiled, which happened more frequently now, it transformed her entire face. "Tell me about the war," she said, as they shared a meal of reconstituted protein and synthetic vegetables. "You mentioned losing your unit." Kai's jaw tightened. It wasn't a topic he discussed, but something about her presence made the words come easier. Kepler 7. We were supposed to be peacekeeping forces protecting civilian evacuations from a Kethvar raid. Intelligence was wrong. It was a full military assault. He described the 3-day battle that had cost him everything he'd cared about, how his squad had held the line while transport ships evacuated 2,000 colonists, how he'd watched his best friend die protecting a family of refugees, how he'd carried the guilt of survival ever since. 47 soldiers, he said quietly. That's what remained of a battalion by the end. I couldn't do it anymore. Fight wars for politicians who saw us as expendable. Vera reached across the small table and took his hand. Her skin was warm, softer than he'd expected, and her touch sent electricity up his arm. The colonists lived, she said simply. 2,000 people saw their children grow up because of what you did. That matters, Kai. When he looked up, her violet eyes held no pity, only understanding. It was then he realized that somewhere between the crashed ship and stolen kisses in the tunnel, he'd fallen completely in love with her. The feeling was mutual, he discovered that night. It started with another shared meal, followed by Vera asking about human music. Kai's small collection of classical pieces seemed to fascinate her, particularly an old piece by Chopin that had belonged to his grandmother. As the haunting melody filled the ship's common area, she moved closer to him on the narrow bench. Your species creates such beautiful sadness, she murmured. We Altarians prefer harmony, symmetry, but this speaks of something deeper. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he felt the steady rhythm of her breathing. When she looked up at him, the space between them seemed to collapse. Their second kiss was nothing like the desperate one in the tunnels. This was exploration, discovery. Two beings from different worlds finding common ground in the oldest language in the universe. Is this wise? She whispered against his lips. Probably not, he admitted. Do you care? Her answer was to draw him toward his quarters, where they made love with the desperate intensity of two people who might not see tomorrow. She was different from human women in small ways. Her skin changed colors with her emotions shifting to deep gold when aroused, and her touch carried an almost electric quality that made every nerve ending sing. Afterward, as they lay tangled, in his narrow bunk, she traced the scars on his chest with gentle fingers. In my world, I would be executed for this, she said matter-of-factly. Mixing bloodlines is considered genetic contamination. And yet here you are. Here I am. She smiled against his skin. Perhaps I'm more of a rebel than I thought. As they traveled deeper into space, she told him about Altarian society, the rigid caste system, the genetic manipulation, the way her people valued perfection over passion. In return, he shared stories of human resilience, of a species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer stubbornness. We're not perfect, he said. We're not even particularly advanced. But we adapt, we survive, and we protect what matters to us. Like you're protecting me, like I'm protecting you. On their final night before reaching Sanctuary Station, Vera made a confession that changed everything. The conspiracy runs deeper than I told you, she said, her skin flickering with nervous silver patterns. The weapons sales are just the beginning. There's a plan to eliminate the human colonies entirely, to claim your territory once the galaxy sees you as a threat. Kai felt cold dread settle in his stomach. How long do we have? Months, perhaps less. unless we can expose the truth and stop them. She turned to face him fully. I can't do this alone, Kai. Will you help me save your people? Looking into her eyes, seeing the trust and love there, Kai realized his quiet life was truly over. But for the first time since the war, he had something worth fighting for. Let's save the galaxy, he said, and meant every word. Sanctuary Station existed in the legal gray area between 3 different stellar governments, which made it perfect for the kind of operation Kai and Vera were planning. The massive trading post attracted smugglers, information brokers, and revolutionaries from across the galaxy, exactly the sort of allies they needed. Their contact was a grizzled human named Captain Torres, who ran guns to resistance movements and had no love for the Altarian Council. Over drinks in a dimly lit cantina that smelled of alien spices and recycled air, he laid out their situation. Your girlfriend's data is worth its weight in quantum cores, he said, studying the intelligence Vera had stolen. But it's not enough. You need hard evidence, communication logs, financial records, something that can't be dismissed as fabrication. The Council keeps their most sensitive files on Nexus Prime, Vera explained. The governmental fortress moon orbiting Altair. It's where they conduct their most secret business. Kai nearly choked on his drink. You want to break into the most heavily defended installation in Altarian space? Not break in, Torres grinned. Walk in. Your lady here still has her noble credentials. As far as they know, she's dead. If she shows up at a formal function claiming to have been in hiding after an assassination attempt, they'll have to acknowledge her publicly before they can move against her. The plan was insane, which made it just crazy enough to work. The Harvest Festival was in 3 days, a celebration where all the noble houses gathered to display their power and influence. Vera could attend, access the secured files during the chaos of the party, and broadcast the evidence before security realized the threat. What about afterward? Kai asked. Even if we expose the conspiracy, they'll still try to kill us. One problem at a time, Torres said. First, let's save the galaxy. Then we'll worry about surviving it. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Torres provided them with forged credentials, advanced hacking equipment, and a fast ship for their escape. Vera worked with him to plan her infiltration, while Kai studied the fortress's defenses, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. On their final night before the mission, as they lay in their rented quarters aboard the station, Vera turned to him with fear in her violet eyes. I may not survive this, she said quietly. My cousin will recognize me the moment I appear. If the transmission fails. Kai silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his love and determination into the contact. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Then we make sure it doesn't fail, he said. Together. What followed was the most passionate night of either of their lives. They made love with desperate intensity, as if they could burn their connection into each other's souls. Vera's skin shifted through every color of the spectrum as pleasure, and emotion overwhelmed her control, creating patterns of light that danced across their intertwined bodies. I love you, she whispered in her native tongue, then repeated it in standard so he would understand. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you gave me something I never thought I could have. What's that? Hope. The Harvest Festival was a display of wealth and power that took Kai's breath away. Thousands of Altarian nobles filled the crystal ballrooms of Nexus Prime, their bioluminescent formal wear creating a light show that rivaled the stars outside. Vera moved among them like she belonged there, her borrowed gown marking her as minor nobility, important enough to attend, not significant enough to draw attention. Kai watched from the service corridors, disguised as maintenance staff and guided by Torres through the fortress's ventilation system. Their communication link crackled with static as Vera approached the secured data core. I'm in, she reported. Beginning download now. That's when everything went wrong. Lady Vera Thane, a cold voice said behind her. How delightfully unexpected. Kai heard the conversation through their link as Lord Commander Thex confronted his cousin. The audio cut out as security scrambled their signal, but he could see through the ventilation grate that Vera was surrounded by guards. "Change of plans," he told Torres. "I'm going in." "That's suicide, kid." "Maybe, but I'm not leaving her." Kai dropped into the ballroom like an avenging angel, his stolen security uniform and forged credentials getting him close enough to matter. The noble screamed and scattered as he opened fire on Thex's guards, his military training taking over as he fought through superior numbers and technology. Vera had managed to complete the upload before her capture, broadcasting the conspiracy's evidence across the galactic communication network. As chaos erupted around them, she broke free from her captors and ran toward him. They almost made it to the escape route. Almost. Thex's final shot caught Vera in the shoulder, spinning her around. As she fell, Kai saw something in her eyes that chilled him more than the wound: acceptance. She thought this was how their story ended. He proved her wrong, fighting his way to her side and carrying her to safety as the fortress erupted in political chaos. The evidence was spreading across the galaxy, impossible to contain or deny. The conspiracy was exposed, but at a terrible cost. As their escape ship jumped to hyperspace, Vera bled in Kai's arms while he applied field dressings with trembling hands. "Stay with me," he whispered. "We're not done yet. The galaxy still needs saving, and I still need you." Her eyes found his, still burning with that inner fire that had captivated him from the beginning. "Always," she whispered. "Always." The aftermath of Vera's revelation sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Within hours of the transmission, 3 Altarian noble houses had withdrawn from the Council, 17 human colonies had mobilized their defense fleets, and the Galactic Senate had called for emergency sessions. The conspiracy that had threatened to ignite sector-wide war was crumbling, but its architects weren't going down without a fight. Kai sat in the medical bay of their commandeered Council cruiser, watching Vera's vital signs stabilize as the autodoc worked to repair her shoulder. They'd stolen the ship during their escape from Nexus Prime, and it had proven surprisingly useful for their current mission, hunting down the remaining conspirators before they could disappear into the galactic underground. "Status report," Vera said as she sat up, her healing factor already closing the wound. "Thex is dead," Kai reported grimly. "Torres confirmed it an hour ago. Apparently, he tried to flee to Kethvar space and got intercepted by his own security forces. They're calling it an accident." "More like a convenient silencing," Vera said, her violet eyes hard. "The Council is cutting loose ends. How many others?" 3 confirmed dead, 4 missing, but we got the big fish." He handed her a data pad. "Council Prime Minister Valdez was arrested this morning on 17 counts of treason. The weapon shipments have been traced back to his personal accounts." Vera smiled, the first genuine happiness he'd seen from her in days. "It's over then." "The conspiracy, yes, the cleanup will take years." Kai sat beside her on the medical bay's narrow bed. "The question is, what do we do now?" It was the conversation they'd been avoiding for weeks. With the immediate crisis resolved, they had to face the reality of their situation. She was Altarian nobility. He was a human ex-soldier. Their worlds were literally light years apart, and the cultural barriers between them remained as high as ever. "The new council has offered me a position," Vera said quietly. "Ambassador to the Human Colonial Alliance. It would mean working to rebuild the trust we've helped destroy." "That's a hell of an opportunity," Kai said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. "You could make real change, prevent something like this from happening again." "I could," she agreed, "if I had the right partner." It took him a moment to understand what she was offering. When it hit him, he felt his heart skip a beat. "You want me to come with you?" "As what, your bodyguard?" Vera laughed, the sound like silver bells in the medical bay's sterile atmosphere. "As my co-ambassador, you beautiful fool. The Alliance specifically requested you by name. Apparently, the human who helped expose a galactic conspiracy has some political capital of his own." Before he could respond, she was kissing him, her hands tangling in his hair as she pressed against him. The kiss tasted of hope and possibility, of a future neither of them had dared to imagine just weeks ago. Are you saying what I think you're saying? He asked when they broke apart. I'm saying I love you, Kai Reeves. I'm saying I choose you over duty, over tradition, over everything my world expects of me. I'm saying yes to whatever impossible future we can build together. Her skin was shifting through the entire spectrum as her emotions overwhelmed her control, creating patterns of light that turned her into something breathtakingly beautiful. But it was her eyes, those violet eyes that had trusted him from the beginning, that held him captive. The Alliance Council wants to meet with us next week, she continued. There's talk of a new treaty organization, something that brings humans and Altarians together as equals rather than superior and subordinate species. And you think we can make that work? I think we already have, she said, gesturing between them. If a bitter ex-soldier and a pampered noblewoman can find common ground, maybe there's hope for everyone else. 6 months later, Kai stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching the first joint human-Altarian patrol ships launch from the docking bays below. The sight still amazed him. Sleek alien vessels flying alongside human cruisers, their crews mixed and their mission shared. Admiring your handiwork? Vera asked, joining him at the viewport. She wore the formal robes of her new position, but she'd modified them with human military decorations, a fusion of their two worlds that perfectly represented what they were building together. Our handiwork, he corrected, slipping an arm around her waist. Think it'll last? With the right guardians, anything can last, she said, leaning into his embrace. Through the transparent aluminum, they watched their impossible dream take flight among the stars. A human and an Altarian, against all odds and expectations, had found love in the darkness between worlds. Now they were building something even more precious, a future where such love didn't have to be hidden. As the patrol ships disappeared into hyperspace, Kai felt Vera's hand find his. Her skin glowed softly with contentment, a warm gold that spoke of peace and satisfaction. They had saved the galaxy, but more importantly, they had saved each other. So, he said, what's our next impossible mission? Vera smiled, her violet eyes reflecting the stars beyond the window. How about forever? I can work with forever, Kai said, and meant every word. In the end, love had proven stronger than fear, trust more powerful than prejudice. And in a galaxy full of wonders, that might have been the most miraculous thing of all. The end.